Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're going to explore two very common human states that are often confused for one another. Two ways of being that many people experience regularly, yet rarely pause to separate. Being alone and feeling lonely. At first glance, they seem like the same thing. Being alone often carries a negative stigma because it's commonly assumed that if someone is alone, they must also be lonely. That assumption shows up in language, in culture, and even in the way people speak to themselves. But when we look at the data, that story doesn't hold up. Scientific research consistently shows that being alone and feeling lonely are not the same state. In fact, they activate different systems in the brain and nervous system. And in many cases, being alone is not associated with distress at all. It can be neutral. It can be restorative. And for some people, it can be one of the most supportive conditions for emotional balance and sleep. That doesn't mean that the feeling of loneliness itself is a bad thing. Loneliness is not a flaw. It's not a failure, and it's not something that needs to be erased. Loneliness is simply a signal, a perception that arises when the nervous system notices a difference between expectation and experience. Much like hunger or tiredness, it exists to bring awareness, not judgment. Tonight, we're going to gently explore that signal, not to fix it, not to argue with it, but to understand what it's actually doing and why it so often appears in quiet moments. If you enjoy these calm explorations and would like to continue resting with science designed for sleep, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, you can leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this quiet space too. There is a familiar experience many people have, usually later in the evening. The noise fades, the lights soften, there is nothing left to respond to. And in that stillness, awareness turns inward. The mind becomes more present. Sensations feel clearer. Thoughts slow enough to be noticed. Sometimes that feels peaceful. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, and sometimes it's labeled as loneliness. If you've ever felt that uncertainty, you're not alone in it. Many people move through their days surrounded by sound, conversation, and constant stimulation. When all of that disappears, the nervous system notices immediately. And what rises in that space is not necessarily sadness. Often, it's awareness. Being alone is a physical condition. It simply means there is no one else with you right now. Loneliness, on the other hand, is an internal experience, a signal that reflects perception, not reality. And that distinction matters more than we're often taught. Because when loneliness is misunderstood as something negative, people rush to fill the space. They add noise, they add distraction, they add stimulation. But biology doesn't always ask for more. Sometimes loneliness is pointing towards something else entirely. As we move through this video, we'll look at what actually happens in the brain when social input fades, why loneliness often shows up in silence, and why being alone can quietly support clarity, emotional regulation, and deeper rest. If you've ever wondered whether something was wrong because quiet felt heavy, if you've ever felt lonely without feeling unhappy, or if you've ever questioned whether enjoying your own company meant something was missing, you belong here. There is nothing you need to change about yourself as we continue. You don't need to become more social. You don't need to become more independent. You don't need to label what you feel. You only need to listen. Because what we'll discover together is that being alone is not emptiness, and loneliness is not failure. They are part of the same system, one that is always trying to guide you back toward balance. Tonight, we'll let the space exist without filling it. We'll allow the quiet to stay. And gently, we'll begin to understand what that quiet might already be giving you. Being alone is often treated like an emotion, but biologically, it isn't one. Being alone is a physical condition. It simply describes the absence of immediate social input. No voices directed at you, no faces responding, no expectations to interpret or return. That's all. There is no emotional requirement attached to that state. The body does not automatically register aloneness as danger. It does not automatically register it as sadness. Those interpretations come later, shaped by experience, memory, and expectation. At the level of the nervous system, being alone means something very specific. It means fewer signals, fewer social cues to monitor, fewer changes in tone to interpret, fewer micro-adjustments to posture, expression, and response. The nervous system notices this immediately. Social interaction is one of the most information-dense environments the human body encounters. Even quiet conversation requires constant calibration. The brain tracks timing, meaning, facial movement, vocal shifts, and emotional nuance all at once. When that input disappears, demand drops. Heart rate often slows slightly. Breathing becomes more regular. Muscle tone softens without instruction. This is not emotional withdrawal. It is physiological relief. Studies in psychophysiology show that reduced social input is associated with increased parasympathetic nervous system activity. This is the branch of the nervous system responsible for rest, digestion, immune regulation, and recovery. In other words, the system begins to repair. Importantly, this happens even if the person feels lonely. The body still responds to reduced demand. This is where confusion often begins. A person may feel lonely and assume that being alone is harming them. But biologically, the opposite may be happening. The nervous system may finally have space to recalibrate. Being alone lowers cognitive load. It reduces the number of decisions the mind must make. It decreases the need for performance, timing, and social mirroring. The brain does less work. And when the brain does less work, it recovers. This is why many people report feeling calmer when they are alone, even if they didn't plan to be. It's not because solitude is inherently meaningful. It's because the nervous system has fewer demands to manage. Being alone does not require identity. It does not imply preference. It does not suggest deficiency. It is simply a state of reduced input. Across cultures and history, aloneness has often been intentionally created, not as punishment, but as function. Monastic traditions, retreat practices, and periods of voluntary solitude often recognize the same biological effect long before neuroscience could measure it. Reduced input stabilizes the system. In modern life, however, aloneness is often framed as something to escape. Silence is filled quickly. Distraction is added immediately. The space is treated as if it were dangerous. But the body does not experience it that way by default. When someone is alone, the nervous system often begins to reorganize. Internal rhythms become more noticeable. Thoughts slow slightly. Sensations feel clearer, not louder, just more defined. This clarity is sometimes misinterpreted. Without distraction, awareness increases. And awareness can feel unfamiliar. That unfamiliarity is not harm, it is presence. Being alone gives the brain a chance to process what it hasn't had time to organize during the day. Emotions that were paused begin to settle. Thoughts that were interrupted complete their arcs. This is not rumination, it is integration. Of course, context matters. Aloneness chosen feels different from aloneness imposed. Safety, control, and predictability shape how the system responds. But at its core, being alone is not an emotional verdict. It is a biological condition, and for many nervous systems, it is one of the few moments when demand truly drops to zero. As we move deeper into this exploration, we'll begin to see why loneliness often appears within aloneness, not because aloneness is harmful, but because it creates enough quiet for signals to be noticed. For now, it's enough to recognize this simple truth. Being alone is not a feeling, it is a state, and states can be used. The body knows how. When input decreases, recovery begins. Loneliness is often treated like an emotion. Something heavy, something negative, something to avoid. But biologically, loneliness is not an emotion in the way sadness or fear is. Loneliness is a perception. It arises when the nervous system notices a mismatch between what it expects and what it experiences. Not between who you are and who you should be. Just between expectation and connection in that moment. This distinction matters because when loneliness is misunderstood as failure, people try to silence it. They distract themselves. They add noise. They assume something is wrong. But the body does not experience loneliness as danger by default. It experiences it as information. In that way, loneliness is closer to hunger than sadness. Hunger does not mean something is broken. It means the body is signaling a need. Fatigue does not mean weakness. It means energy has been spent. Loneliness works the same way. It signals awareness of connection, not the absence of worth. Research in neuroscience supports this framing. Studies show that loneliness activates brain regions associated with monitoring and attention, not despair. These circuits are involved in noticing gaps, tracking the environment, and preparing for adjustment. The brain becomes more observant, more inwardly focused, more aware of subtle cues. This does not mean distress. It means recalibration. Loneliness often encourages the nervous system to slow down and take inventory. It asks quiet questions, not urgently, not loudly, just enough to be noticed when distractions fade. This is why loneliness often appears in stillness. During the day, constant input masks subtle internal signals. Sound, movement, conversation, and novelty keep attention outward. But when that input disappears, perception turns inward. The signal becomes audible. That does not make it harmful. It makes it honest. Importantly, loneliness is not sadness. Many people feel lonely without feeling unhappy. They may feel calm, functional, even content, and still notice a sense of separation. That experience confuses people, but it makes sense when loneliness is understood as perception rather than emotion. The nervous system is simply registering its current state. Loneliness does not assign meaning. It does not accuse. It does not judge. Meaning is added later, often culturally. In many societies, loneliness has been framed as something shameful, a sign of social failure, a condition to be corrected quickly. But biology does not support this interpretation. Loneliness does not activate panic systems. It does not inherently elevate stress hormones. It does not automatically impair functioning. What it does is increase awareness. This awareness can feel uncomfortable when unfamiliar. But discomfort does not equal danger. When loneliness is allowed to exist without resistance, the nervous system often uses it as a cue for internal recalibration. Needs become clearer. Boundaries sharpen. Values come into focus. This process does not require immediate action. It requires space. Loneliness becomes problematic only when it is interpreted as something that must be escaped. When the signal is treated as an emergency rather than information, regulation is interrupted. The system is not asking for noise. It is asking to be heard. As we continue, we'll explore why the brain so easily confuses being alone with feeling lonely, and why that confusion has deep evolutionary roots. For now, it's enough to hold this gently. Loneliness is not a verdict. It is not a flaw. It is not a failure of connection. It is a perceptual signal, one that becomes visible when the world grows quiet enough to notice. And noticing is not a problem. It is the beginning of understanding. The confusion between being alone and feeling lonely does not come from misunderstanding. It comes from history. Long before language, long before cities, long before quiet rooms at night, the human nervous system learned to associate presence with safety. Groups meant protection. Sound meant life nearby. Movement meant awareness. Silence meant uncertainty. That association never disappeared. It simply adapted. Even now, when the world is safe and still, the nervous system carries that ancient wiring. When social input fades, a subtle monitoring response can appear. Not panic, not fear, just awareness. The brain asks a quiet question. Is everything accounted for? This question is not conscious. It is biological. When you are alone, especially in stillness, the brain reduces external processing and increases internal scanning. Attention turns inward. Sensations feel clearer. Thoughts slow enough to be noticed. This shift is often mislabeled. People assume that increased awareness means something is wrong. They interpret the change in focus as loneliness, even when no distress is present. But the brain is not detecting absence. It is adjusting orientation. Evolutionary survival favored systems that noticed when conditions changed. Silence was a change. Reduced social cues meant the environment required closer observation. So the nervous system learned to listen more carefully. That listening remains today. When you're alone, the brain does not assume danger. It increases sensitivity. It opens monitoring channels that were unnecessary during engagement. This increased sensitivity can feel unfamiliar. During the day, attention is directed outward. Tasks, conversation, movement, and sound keep the brain occupied. There is little space to notice subtle internal states. At night, that space returns. Stillness removes distraction. Quiet amplifies perception. The mind becomes aware of itself. This is where confusion often arises. The brain's default mode network becomes more active when external input decreases. This network supports self-referential thought, memory integration, and internal narrative. It helps the brain make sense of experience. When it activates, people often notice thoughts they didn't realize were present. Memories surface, feelings clarify, awareness deepens. This is not loneliness, it is processing. But because this processing happens when alone, the two become linked. Silence is mistaken for sadness. Stillness is mistaken for emptiness. Awareness is mistaken for lack. Reduced distraction does not create feeling. It reveals it. The brain is simply doing what it evolved to do. When conditions quiet down, it checks in. It scans internally. It integrates. In modern life, this state is rare. Noise fills gaps. Screens occupy pauses. Social input continues late into the evening. The brain rarely experiences extended quiet. So when it does, the shift feels dramatic. People assume the quiet caused the feeling. In reality, the quiet allowed the feeling to be noticed. Another factor deepens this confusion. Human brains are prediction machines. They constantly compare expectation with reality. When the expectation of connection meets the reality of solitude, the brain registers a difference. That difference is not negative. It is informational. But without understanding, information feels like judgment. The nervous system is not saying, "You are alone." It is saying, "Conditions have changed." That signal becomes especially noticeable at night. Light dims, activity slows. The world simplifies. The brain moves from action to reflection. This transition can feel vulnerable, not because something is missing, but because there is less to hold attention outward. The brain fills the space by turning inward. This inward turn is often mistaken for loneliness because it feels different from daytime awareness. It is slower, quieter, more present. But difference does not mean deficit. Evolution did not wire the brain to suffer in solitude. It wired the brain to pay attention. Attention without distraction feels intense at first. Over time, it becomes calm. The confusion fades when the nervous system learns that stillness is safe. As this understanding settles, the brain stops treating quiet as uncertainty. Monitoring softens. Internal scanning becomes gentle rather than alert. The body relaxes. This is why stillness often feels uncomfortable at first, then soothing later. The nervous system is recalibrating. Understanding this process removes fear from quiet moments. It reframes loneliness as a signal that awareness has shifted, not that connection is missing. Being alone does not cause loneliness. It creates the conditions where perception changes. And perception is not a problem. It is the nervous system doing what it has always done when the world grows quiet enough to notice. As we continue, we'll look more closely at what happens physiologically when you're alone and why the body often responds with relief rather than distress. For now, it's enough to know this. The brain confuses alone with lonely because it was designed to notice change, not because solitude is harmful, but because awareness becomes possible. When you're alone, something very specific begins to happen in the body. Not emotionally, not symbolically, physiologically. The nervous system starts to change its posture. Throughout the day, especially in social environments, the body operates in a state of readiness. It listens for cues. It tracks tone, timing, and response. Even quiet interaction requires constant calibration. The system stays alert because something may be asked of it at any moment. When that social input disappears, demand drops. The nervous system notices immediately. One of the first shifts occurs in the balance between the two branches of the autonomic nervous system. During engagement, the sympathetic branch tends to be more active. This branch supports alertness, responsiveness, and outward attention. When you're alone, sympathetic tone begins to decrease. Heart rate often slows slightly. Breathing becomes more regular. Muscle tension eases without instruction. At the same time, parasympathetic activity increases. This branch supports rest, digestion, immune function, and repair. It is the state the body relies on for recovery. This shift does not require intention. It happens automatically when demand reduces. Being alone removes a layer of vigilance. There is no one to respond to, no expressions to mirror, no timing to manage. The nervous system receives a clear signal. Nothing is required right now. This signal allows monitoring circuits to stand down. The brain no longer needs to scan constantly for social cues. Attention can soften. Awareness can spread rather than narrow. One measurable outcome of this shift is improved heart rate variability. Heart rate variability reflects how flexibly the nervous system responds to change. Higher variability is associated with better stress regulation and greater resilience. Studies have shown that periods of solitude are associated with increased heart rate variability, indicating a move toward parasympathetic dominance. This is not emotional withdrawal, it is regulation. Another change occurs in stress chemistry. Social environments, even positive ones, tend to keep cortisol slightly elevated. Cortisol helps maintain alertness and energy availability. When engagement continues, cortisol remains present. When you're alone, cortisol levels begin to decline. This decline does not happen instantly. It unfolds gradually as the nervous system confirms that demand has truly ended. Over time, reduced stimulation supports lower baseline cortisol levels. Lower cortisol allows deeper recovery. Sleep pressure builds more cleanly. Digestion improves. Inflammatory processes soften. The body begins repairing rather than preparing. Vigilance, signaling also decreases. When social input fades, the brain reduces activity in circuits responsible for threat monitoring and response readiness. This does not mean the system becomes unaware. It means awareness becomes broader and less focused on potential demand. The body moves from scanning to settling. This is why many people feel calmer when alone, even if they don't label the experience as relaxation. The calm is not emotional, it is systemic. Importantly, this physiological response can occur even when loneliness is present. A person may feel lonely and still experience nervous system downshifting. These processes are not mutually exclusive. The body can be regulating even while the mind is interpreting. This is another reason loneliness is often misunderstood. People assume that feeling lonely means the body is under stress. In reality, the nervous system may be recovering while the perception is simply becoming more noticeable. Reduced stimulation gives internal signals room to surface. Being alone also reduces cognitive load. The brain no longer needs to manage multiple streams of social information. It stops predicting responses. It stops preparing replies. It stops maintaining outward focus. Energy is conserved. This conservation allows the brain to reallocate resources toward integration. Experiences from the day are organized. Emotional residue is processed. Attention becomes less fragmented. None of this requires effort. It happens because demand has dropped. Across cultures, practices that intentionally reduce social input have long been used to support clarity and recovery. Retreats, silent periods, and solitary reflection all leverage the same biological mechanism. Less input allows regulation. In modern life, these conditions are rare. Silence is often avoided. Being alone is filled quickly with distraction. The nervous system is rarely allowed to complete its downshift. When it finally is, the contrast can feel intense. But intensity does not mean harm. It means the system is doing something it doesn't get to do very often. As we continue, we'll look at why loneliness so often appears during these moments of quiet, and why that appearance does not mean the nervous system is struggling. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Being alone changes the nervous system in measurable ways. It reduces vigilance. It lowers stress chemistry. It increases regulation. Even when the mind feels uncertain, the body often knows exactly what it's doing. And when demand truly fades, recovery begins. Loneliness has a timing to it. For many people, it doesn't arrive in the middle of busy days. It doesn't interrupt conversations or tasks. It doesn't appear when attention is occupied. It shows up when things slow down. Late in the evening, in quiet rooms, when lights are dim and nothing is expected. This timing is not accidental. During the day, the nervous system is flooded with input. Sound, movement, conversation, notifications, and tasks all compete for attention. Dopamine-driven engagement keeps awareness oriented outward. The brain remains occupied with relevance and response. Internal signals are present, but they're masked. When that stimulation fades, the masking fades with it. Loneliness does not suddenly appear because something went wrong. It becomes noticeable because the system has stopped filtering. Reduced distraction allows perception to sharpen. The brain shifts from doing to noticing. This shift can feel unfamiliar, especially in a culture that values constant engagement. People are taught to interpret stillness as lack and silence as emptiness. But biologically, quiet creates access. One of the changes that occurs in quiet moments is reduced dopamine masking. Dopamine helps the brain focus on goals, novelty, and reward. High dopamine activity keeps attention directed outward. When stimulation decreases, dopamine activity softens. This allows internal states to surface. Thoughts that were paused resume. Emotions that were set aside become clearer. Subtle perceptions move into awareness. Loneliness is one of these perceptions. It is not being created in that moment. It is being noticed. This distinction matters. The nervous system does not generate loneliness in response to quiet. Quiet simply removes the layers that were keeping perception outward. This is why loneliness often feels louder at night. The world has fewer signals. The body has fewer demands. Attention naturally turns inward. Internal narrative becomes more audible. This narrative is not necessarily negative. It may simply be reflective. But without context, reflection can feel like isolation. People often mistake awareness for deterioration. They assume that because loneliness is more noticeable, something has worsened. In reality, nothing has changed except access. Awareness has increased. The brain is doing what it does when input drops. It scans internally. This scanning helps the nervous system recalibrate. It assesses emotional balance, needs, and alignment. It checks in, much like the body checks hunger or fatigue. Loneliness fits into this process. It signals attention to connection, not urgency, not deficiency. Importantly, quiet moments also remove social buffering. During the day, interaction provides immediate feedback. Expression is mirrored. Responses are returned. This buffering regulates emotion externally. When alone, that regulation becomes internal. This transition can feel exposed at first. But exposure does not mean danger. The nervous system is learning to regulate without external cues. Nighttime loneliness often reflects this shift. The system is no longer leaning on social input to manage emotional state. It is practicing self-regulation. This is not loss. It is skill development. Another factor is expectation. Many people associate night with connection, shared spaces, conversation, winding down together. When those expectations meet solitude, the brain registers a difference. That difference becomes perceptible as loneliness. Again, this is informational. The nervous system is not demanding immediate correction. It is simply noting contrast. Without understanding, people rush to fill the space. They add noise. They reach for distraction. They assume silence is something to escape. But doing so interrupts the recalibration process. When loneliness is allowed to exist without resistance, it often softens. The nervous system adapts to quiet. Awareness becomes less sharp. Internal signals settle. Over time, the system learns that quiet is safe. This learning changes how loneliness is experienced. It becomes less intense, less alarming, more like a passing signal than a problem. The body becomes comfortable with stillness. This is why people who regularly spend time alone often report less distress in quiet moments. Their nervous systems have adapted. The signal is familiar. Nothing needs to be done. As we continue, we'll explore how alone time supports cognitive restoration and why mental fatigue often improves when social input is reduced. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Loneliness often appears in quiet moments, not because quiet causes harm, but because quiet allows awareness. Awareness is not deterioration, it is presence. And presence, once understood, becomes calmer with time. When people think about rest, they often imagine sleep as the primary source of recovery. but the brain has other ways of restoring itself long before sleep begins. One of the most effective is reduced cognitive demand. Throughout the day, the brain performs an extraordinary amount of work. It switches attention rapidly. It tracks context. It holds conversations in awareness while managing tasks, emotions, timing, and expectation. Even when nothing feels particularly stressful, the load accumulates. This constant switching is expensive. Every transition between tasks carries a cost. Every shift in attention requires energy. Over time, this leads to cognitive fatigue, not exhaustion, but a subtle dulling of clarity and ease. Alone time changes this dynamic. When you're alone, the brain no longer needs to divide itself across multiple streams of information. There are fewer inputs to manage, fewer interruptions, fewer predictions about what will be asked next. Attention can settle. This settling is not boredom, it is restoration. Research in cognitive psychology shows that periods of solitude are associated with improved attention recovery. The brain regains its ability to focus without strain. Clarity improves not because effort increases, but because effort decreases. This effect is especially noticeable after long periods of social or informational engagement. When social input is present, the brain must constantly monitor and respond. It tracks language, facial expression, tone, and timing, often simultaneously. This multitasking drains executive resources. When alone, those demands disappear. Executive function begins to recover. Executive function includes abilities like planning, impulse control, flexible thinking, and working memory. These functions rely on limited cognitive resources. When those resources are overused, thinking becomes slower and less precise. Solitude allows replenishment. Memory consolidation also benefits from reduced input. During quiet periods, the brain organizes information gathered throughout the day. Experiences are sorted. Emotional significance is assigned. Unnecessary details fade while relevant ones strengthen. This process does not require sleep to begin. It begins as soon as cognitive demand drops. Being alone provides the conditions for this organization to occur without interruption. There is no need to respond, no new information competing for attention. The brain can complete processing without hurry. Mental fatigue begins to lift. This is why many people report feeling clearer after time alone, even if they did not intend to rest. The clarity is not emotional relief. It is cognitive recovery. Another important aspect of restoration is reduced switching cost. Switching between tasks, conversations, or social contexts requires the brain to reorient repeatedly. Each reorientation uses energy. Over time, this creates a sense of fragmentation. Solitude reduces switching. With fewer demands, attention remains more stable. The brain can remain in one mode longer. This stability conserves energy and supports efficiency. The result is not increased productivity in the moment. It is increased capacity afterward. Importantly, this restoration can occur even if loneliness is present. A person may feel lonely while still experiencing cognitive recovery. These processes operate independently. The mind may interpret the experience while the brain quietly repairs itself. This distinction matters. Loneliness does not prevent restoration. Awareness does not cancel recovery. Over time, repeated exposure to solitude strengthens this effect. The brain becomes more efficient at downshifting. Attention recovers more quickly. Mental fatigue resolves faster. This adaptation changes how alone time feels. What once felt restless becomes neutral. What once felt heavy becomes quiet. What once felt empty becomes spacious. Cognitive restoration does not require isolation. It does not require extended retreats. It simply requires periods where demand drops low enough for the brain to stop performing. Modern life rarely allows this. Noise fills gaps. Stimulation continues late into the evening. The brain is asked to remain available far longer than it was designed to. When alone time finally appears, the system uses it. As we continue, we'll explore how this cognitive quiet affects emotional regulation and why emotions often settle more easily when social performance is no longer required. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Being alone does not drain the brain, it restores it. And restoration, like sleep, begins the moment effort ends. Emotional regulation is often thought of as something that happens through interaction. We talk things through. We read expressions. We adjust ourselves in response to others. That kind of regulation is real, but it is not the only kind. There is another form of emotional regulation that happens quietly, without conversation, without feedback, and without performance. It happens when you are alone. When social input is present, emotions are constantly shaped by response. Tone is mirrored. Expressions are adjusted. Reactions are anticipated. Even supportive interaction requires emotional coordination. The nervous system stays alert. When you are alone, that coordination ends. There is no need to explain how you feel. No need to soften or amplify emotion. No need to track another person's response. Emotions are allowed to exist without adjustment. This changes how they move through the system. Research in affective neuroscience shows that quiet environments are associated with reduced amygdala activation. The amygdala is involved in emotional salience and threat detection. When stimulation decreases, this system becomes less reactive. Emotions slow down. They become less urgent, less sharp, less demanding. This does not mean emotions disappear. It means they are processed more safely. Without social performance, emotions no longer need to be managed in real time. The nervous system is free to observe rather than respond. Feelings rise and fall without interruption. This is regulation through allowance. Many people are unfamiliar with this process. They associate emotional safety with reassurance from others. When alone, they assume regulation is impossible. But the body is capable of regulating internally. In solitude, emotional processing becomes slower and more deliberate. The system has time to integrate without interference. Emotional signals are felt fully, then released naturally. There is no pressure to resolve anything. This is especially important for subtle emotions. Feelings like quiet sadness, nostalgia, uncertainty, or longing often need space to unfold. In social settings, these emotions are quickly redirected or suppressed. Alone, they can complete their arc. The absence of social input also reduces emotional masking. During interaction, people unconsciously filter emotions to maintain harmony. They adjust expression to fit context. When alone, that filter drops. This can feel vulnerable at first. But vulnerability does not equal instability. It means emotions are no longer being managed for an audience. Over time, this allows emotional clarity to increase. Feelings become easier to identify. Boundaries become clearer. Emotional responses feel less confusing because they are no longer layered with performance. This is why people often describe alone time as emotionally grounding, even when it includes moments of discomfort. The nervous system is learning to regulate without external scaffolding. Importantly, this process does not require emotional insight or self-analysis. It happens automatically when demand decreases. The body knows how to settle when it is not being observed. This is also why emotional intensity often decreases after periods of solitude. The system has had time to process without interruption. Loneliness may still be present, but loneliness does not prevent regulation. A person can feel lonely and still experience emotional settling. These processes operate on different levels. The emotional system can be stabilizing even while perception is adjusting. This distinction is often missed. People assume that feeling lonely means emotional distress is increasing. In reality, emotional regulation may be improving beneath the surface. Over time, repeated exposure to solitude strengthens this ability. Emotions become less reactive. Recovery becomes faster. Regulation becomes more internal. This does not make someone emotionally distant. It makes them emotionally stable. Solitude teaches the nervous system that emotions do not require immediate response. They require space. As we continue, we'll explore how loneliness itself can be understood as information rather than judgment, and why interpreting it this way changes how it's experienced. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Being alone allows emotions to settle without performance, without pressure, without interruption. And in that quiet space, regulation happens naturally. Loneliness is often interpreted as a verdict, a sign that something is wrong, a message that something is missing, a judgment about where someone stands in relation to others. But loneliness does not arrive with conclusions. It arrives with data. At a biological level, loneliness functions as information. It reflects how the nervous system is comparing expectation with experience in that moment. Not who you are, not what you deserve. Simply how things currently align. This distinction changes everything. When loneliness is treated as judgment, people react defensively. They try to fix it quickly. They add noise. They seek reassurance. They interpret the feeling as evidence of deficiency. But when loneliness is treated as information, the response becomes softer. Information does not accuse. It informs. In neuroscience, signals are neutral until meaning is assigned. Pain, hunger, fatigue, and thirst are all signals. They indicate states that invite attention, not shame. Loneliness belongs to this category. It alerts the system to relational awareness. It highlights contrast. It invites recalibration. It does not demand immediate correction. This is why loneliness can exist alongside contentment. A person may feel lonely while still feeling stable, capable, and calm. The signal is present, but it is not overwhelming. It is simply noticed. The problem begins when the signal is misinterpreted. When loneliness is labeled as failure, stress systems activate. The body shifts into urgency. Cortisol rises. Attention narrows. The system prepares to escape the feeling rather than understand it. But when loneliness is allowed to remain neutral, a different process unfolds. The brain begins adaptive recalibration. Adaptive recalibration means the nervous system uses information to subtly adjust expectations, needs, and boundaries. This happens without conscious effort. The system gently realigns based on what it notices. Loneliness can support this process. It can clarify what kind of connection feels nourishing. It can highlight when stimulation has been excessive. It can reveal when quiet is needed rather than more input. In this way, loneliness is not a signal to add something blindly. It is a signal to listen carefully. This reframing removes pressure. There is no requirement to act immediately, no demand to fill space, no urgency to change circumstances. The signal can be observed without response. When loneliness is treated as information, it often softens on its own. The nervous system recognizes that it has been heard. Monitoring decreases. Urgency fades. The system settles. This is similar to how hunger behaves when acknowledged. Ignoring hunger intensifies it. Panicking about hunger creates stress. But noticing hunger calmly allows the body to regulate more smoothly. Loneliness works the same way. It is not asking for judgment. It is asking for awareness. Importantly, loneliness does not imply deficiency in connection. Many people experience loneliness even when surrounded by others. This further supports the idea that loneliness is perceptual, not situational. It reflects internal alignment, not external quantity. Understanding this reduces self-blame. Loneliness is not proof of failure. It is evidence of sensitivity. The nervous system is noticing nuance. It is registering subtle differences between expectation and experience. This capacity is not a flaw. It is a form of awareness. Over time, treating loneliness as information rather than judgment changes how it is experienced. The signal becomes less intense. It loses emotional charge. It becomes part of the background rather than the foreground. The body learns that awareness is safe. This learning allows regulation to continue uninterrupted. Emotional settling deepens. Cognitive clarity improves. Sleep becomes more accessible. Nothing needed to be fixed. As we move forward, we'll explore why feeling lonely does not necessarily mean you need more people, and how, in some cases, additional connection can actually increase overload. For now, it's enough to hold this gently. Loneliness is not a verdict about your life. It is not a judgment about your worth. It is not a problem demanding immediate action. It is information. And information, when understood, guides the system quietly back toward balance. When loneliness appears, the most common assumption is simple. Add connection. More conversation. More interaction. More stimulation. This response feels logical because loneliness is often framed as a lack. But biology does not always agree with this interpretation. Sometimes, loneliness is not a signal that something is missing. It is a signal that something is misaligned. The nervous system does not measure connection by quantity. It measures it by impact. Too much social input can be just as dysregulating as too little, especially for systems that are sensitive to stimulation. In these cases, adding more people does not resolve loneliness. It amplifies it. This is because social interaction carries load. Even positive interaction requires the brain to track tone, timing, expression, and response. The nervous system remains alert, ready to adjust. Over time, this sustained engagement can lead to social saturation. Social saturation occurs when the system has received more input than it can comfortably integrate. When saturation is present, loneliness can still appear. This confuses people. They wonder why they feel lonely despite being connected. They assume something is wrong with them or with their relationships. But often, the issue is not absence of connection. It is excess of input. The nervous system may be asking for reduction, not addition. In these situations, loneliness is not pointing toward people. It is pointing toward space. Space allows integration. When the system is overloaded, it cannot fully register connection, even when it is present. The signal of loneliness arises because alignment has been disrupted, not because connection is missing. This is supported by research on stress markers. Studies show that excessive social engagement can increase cortisol levels, especially when interaction lacks predictability or recovery time. Elevated cortisol interferes with emotional regulation and sleep readiness. Adding more stimulation under these conditions deepens dysregulation. Solitude, on the other hand, restores identity coherence. Identity coherence refers to the sense of internal alignment that arises when the nervous system is no longer adapting to external cues. In solitude, the system stops mirroring and responding. Internal rhythms re-emerge. Thoughts feel more like one's own. Emotions settle into clarity. Attention becomes less fragmented. This coherence reduces loneliness, even without adding connection. Because loneliness is not always about others. Sometimes it is about disconnection from self. Solitude repairs that connection. Importantly, this does not mean people are unnecessary. It means timing matters. Connection is most nourishing when the nervous system is ready to receive it. When readiness is absent, interaction becomes noise. Loneliness in these moments is not asking for company. It is asking for regulation. Many people misinterpret this signal and push themselves into more engagement. They override the need for rest. They stay available when the system is already saturated. This leads to deeper fatigue and more persistent loneliness. Understanding this changes the response. Instead of asking, "Who do I need right now?" the question becomes, "What does my system need right now?" Sometimes the answer is connection. Sometimes the answer is quiet. Neither is better. Both are adaptive. Loneliness does not prescribe one solution. It invites awareness. When solitude is chosen in response to loneliness, the nervous system often settles. Monitoring decreases. Stress chemistry softens. Identity coherence returns. Loneliness loses urgency. This process does not require withdrawal from relationships. It requires balance. Connection and solitude are not opposites. they are complementary states. Each supports regulation in different ways. Learning to recognize when solitude is needed prevents loneliness from becoming chronic. It allows the system to recalibrate before overload accumulates. As we move forward, we'll explore how alone time supports long-term cognitive and emotional stability, and how this balance influences sleep and recovery. For now, it's enough to remember this. Feeling lonely does not automatically mean you need people. Sometimes it means you need less input, less demand, less performance. And in that reduction, the system finds its way back to alignment. When the brain is no longer required to respond, something subtle begins to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. Throughout the day, the brain operates in a task-oriented mode. Attention is directed outward. Information is evaluated for relevance. Responses are prepared before they are needed. Even quiet moments often carry an underlying readiness. When you are alone and nothing is expected of you, that readiness begins to release. The brain shifts out of performance. One of the most noticeable changes occurs in the balance of brain activity. As external demands decrease, faster, task-focused rhythms soften. Slower rhythms associated with rest and internal awareness become more prominent. Alpha activity increases. Theta activity begins to appear. These patterns are not signs of sleep. They are signs of readiness for rest. Alpha rhythms are associated with relaxed alertness. They appear when the brain is awake but no longer strained. Theta rhythms often emerge during deep reflection, early sleep stages, and moments of inward focus. Together, they signal a brain that is settling. This transition happens most easily when social input is absent. Social environments keep the brain in a responsive state. Even passive presence requires monitoring. Tone, movement, and timing remain relevant. The system stays partially activated. When alone, monitoring reduces. The brain no longer needs to predict or respond. It can move into a default mode of operation that supports integration rather than reaction. This is where the default mode network becomes active. The default mode network supports self-referential processing, memory integration, and internal coherence. It allows the brain to connect experiences, emotions, and meaning without external input. When this network activates, people often notice a sense of inwardness. Thoughts may drift, memories may surface, awareness becomes less structured. This is not rumination. Rumination is repetitive and effortful. Default mode activity is fluid and associative. The difference is important. When the brain is at rest, it is not spinning. It is weaving. Experiences from the day are integrated. Emotional weight is distributed. The nervous system checks for balance. This process is restorative. Importantly, it does not require silence to be absolute. It requires relevance to be low. Being alone reduces relevance naturally. There is no one to respond to, no signal that demands immediate meaning. The brain relaxes its grip. This relaxed state is closely related to sleep onset. As alpha and theta activity increase, the boundary between wakefulness and sleep softens. Sleep pressure builds more smoothly. The transition into rest becomes less abrupt. This is why many people feel drowsy when alone. even if they were alert moments earlier. The brain is preparing. Another change that occurs during this state is reduced emotional reactivity. With less stimulation, amygdala becomes less active. Emotional signals are still present, but they are less urgent. Feelings feel quieter, less sharp, more manageable. This emotional quiet supports deeper rest later. The brain also reduces energy expenditure. Without the need to process complex social information, metabolic demand decreases. This conservation supports repair and recovery. The system is no longer preparing for action. It is restoring itself. Loneliness may still be noticed during this process, but loneliness does not interrupt rest readiness. The brain can be settling even while perception adjusts. These processes run in parallel. This is why quiet moments can feel both reflective and calming at the same time. The brain is not confused. It is transitioning. Over time, repeated exposure to this state trains the nervous system to enter rest more easily. The brain becomes familiar with stillness. Monitoring decreases more quickly. Sleep onset improves. This familiarity changes how alone time feels. What once felt empty becomes neutral. What once felt unsettling becomes calm. What once felt like waiting becomes resting. The brain learns that being alone does not require vigilance. It requires nothing at all. As we continue, we'll explore how this resting state influences long-term regulation and why it plays a role in emotional resilience and sleep quality. For now, it's enough to recognize this. When you are alone, the brain is not idle. It is resting, and rest, even before sleep begins, is already doing its work. For many people, being alone does not feel immediately calming. It can feel awkward, restless, even slightly uneasy. This reaction is common, and it does not mean something is wrong. Discomfort in solitude is not a sign that being alone is harmful. It is a sign that the nervous system is adjusting to a change in demand. For most of the day, the brain is occupied. It responds to cues, processes information, and manages interaction. This constant engagement creates a steady stream of stimulation. Over time, the nervous system adapts to that level of input. When that input suddenly drops, the system notices. This drop can feel unfamiliar. The nervous system has learned to associate activity with normalcy. Stillness feels different, not because it is dangerous, but because it is rare. The body briefly increases monitoring to understand the new conditions. This monitoring is often misinterpreted as discomfort, but it is simply orientation. At first, awareness sharpens. Sensations feel clearer. Thoughts feel louder. Emotions feel closer to the surface. This increase in awareness can feel like agitation, even though no threat is present. The nervous system is checking in. It is asking quietly, "Is this safe?" With time, the answer becomes clear. Nothing is required. Nothing is being asked. Nothing needs to be managed. As this understanding settles, monitoring begins to soften. Another reason solitude can feel uncomfortable at first is the absence of distraction. Distraction serves a purpose. It keeps attention outward and reduces contact with internal states. When distraction disappears, internal signals become more noticeable. This does not mean those signals are new. It means they are no longer being filtered. Thoughts that were postponed return. Feelings that were set aside reappear. Subtle sensations move into awareness. This can feel overwhelming if someone is not used to listening inwardly. But overwhelm does not mean harm. It means contact. The nervous system is reacquainting itself with internal experience. This process takes time. Just as eyes adjust to darkness, the nervous system adjusts to quiet. Initially, contrast feels strong. Over time, perception normalizes. What once felt intense becomes gentle. Another factor is expectation. Many people carry the belief that being alone should feel peaceful immediately. When it does not, they assume failure. They judge the experience rather than allowing it to unfold. But regulation is a process, not an instant state. The nervous system does not switch modes on the command. It transitions gradually, testing safety as it goes. Discomfort is part of that transition. Importantly, this discomfort does not increase with continued solitude. It decreases. With repetition, the system learns that being alone does not require alertness. Safety becomes familiar. Over time, the nervous system stops scanning so actively. Awareness softens. Internal signals settle. Quiet becomes neutral rather than charged. This adaptation is measurable. Research shows that repeated exposure to low stimulation environments reduces baseline vigilance. The body learns that quiet does not predict threat. Stress responses become less reactive. This learning supports long-term regulation. People who regularly spend time alone often report that solitude becomes easier, then comfortable, then restorative. What once felt uneasy becomes grounding. The nervous system has adapted. This adaptation does not require forcing stillness or enduring discomfort. It happens naturally when solitude is approached without judgment and without urgency. There is nothing to accomplish, nothing to process deliberately, nothing to resolve. The body learns on its own. As we continue, we'll explore how being alone supports identity formation and internal coherence over time, and why this process can feel stabilizing rather than isolating. For now, it's enough to remember this. Discomfort in solitude is not a sign that you should escape it. It is a sign that your system is learning something new. And learning, at first, always feels unfamiliar. When people spend time alone regularly, something quiet but lasting begins to take shape. Not a personality shift, not a change in values, but a steadier sense of internal alignment. This is identity integration. Identity integration refers to the process by which thoughts, emotions, preferences, and values begin to feel coherent rather than fragmented. Instead of being adjusted moment by moment in response to external cues, the internal system starts to organize itself around consistency. Solitude supports this process. In social environments, identity is often flexible. The nervous system adapts quickly to context. Tone changes. Priorities shift. Expression adjusts. This flexibility is useful and healthy, but it comes at a cost. The cost is fragmentation. When attention is constantly oriented outward, the internal system rarely has time to check in with itself. preferences blur, signals overlap, emotional clarity weakens. Alone time reverses this pattern. Without external feedback, the system turns inward. There is no need to perform, explain, or adjust. Internal signals are allowed to exist without comparison. This allows the mind to stabilize. Research on self-referential processing shows that periods of solitude support more consistent internal narratives. The brain becomes less reactive to external evaluation and more grounded in internal reference points. Self-referential processing becomes quieter but clearer. Thoughts feel less scattered. Preferences feel more distinct. Emotions feel easier to place. This clarity does not arrive all at once. It emerges gradually through repeated exposure to low-demand environments. Solitude reduces dependence on external validation. When social input is constant, the nervous system learns to orient itself around response. Approval, feedback, and reaction shape internal states. Over time, this can create reliance on external cues for emotional regulation and self-assessment. Alone, those cues are absent. The system must regulate internally. This is not deprivation, it is training. The nervous system begins to recognize its own signals without needing confirmation. Feelings become trustworthy. Preferences feel legitimate without explanation. Identity coherence strengthens. This does not make someone rigid or detached. It makes them stable. Stability allows flexibility without loss of self. Another benefit of solitude is reduced identity noise. In social environments, the brain is constantly comparing how one is perceived, how one fits, how one is received. These comparisons generate mental noise. Solitude quiets that noise. Without comparison, internal signals rise to the surface. Values become clearer. Boundaries sharpen gently. The system learns what feels aligned and what does not. This learning is not cognitive. It is embodied. The nervous system recognizes coherence as safety. When internal signals align, vigilance decreases. Stress chemistry softens. Emotional regulation improves. This is why people often describe alone time as grounding. Not because it isolates them, but because it reconnects them with internal continuity. Importantly, identity formation through solitude does not require introspection or analysis. It happens automatically when demand decreases. The system organizes itself when given space. Over time, this organization carries into social environments. People who spend time alone regularly often report feeling less reactive to external opinion. They remain connected without losing internal clarity. External validation becomes less necessary, not because connection is unwanted, but because identity is already anchored. This anchoring supports long-term psychological resilience. When the system knows itself, it adapts more easily. Stress is processed more cleanly. Emotional responses feel proportionate rather than overwhelming. Solitude does not create separation from others. It creates connection to self, and that connection makes future interaction more nourishing. As we continue, we'll explore an important distinction between being alone and being isolated, and why choice and safety matter deeply to the nervous system. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Solitude is not emptiness. It is integration. And integration is what allows the nervous system to feel whole, even in quiet. Being alone and being isolated are often spoken about as if they are the same thing. They are not. This distinction is important because the nervous system responds to these two states very differently. Being alone is a condition. Being isolated is an experience. Alone can be chosen or neutral. Isolated involves a lack of agency or safety. This difference changes everything at a biological level. When someone is alone by choice, the nervous system receives a signal of control. Control is one of the strongest predictors of perceived safety. When the system knows it can re-engage with others if needed, vigilance remains low. The body relaxes. When someone is isolated, that sense of control is absent. Connection feels unavailable or inaccessible. The nervous system does not register solitude as rest. It registers uncertainty. Uncertainty increases monitoring. This is why isolation is stressful in a way that chosen solitude is not. The body is not responding to the absence of people. It is responding to the absence of agency. Research consistently shows that perceived control alters stress response. When individuals believe they have choice, stress hormones remain lower. When choice is removed, cortisol rises, even in otherwise calm environments. Choice matters biologically. Being alone with agency allows the parasympathetic nervous system to engage. Rest, digestion, and recovery become possible. The system understands that solitude is temporary and self-directed. Isolation does not carry that reassurance. In isolation, the nervous system remains alert. Monitoring continues. The system prepares for uncertainty because re-engagement feels unclear. This distinction explains why some people find solitude deeply restorative, while others find it distressing. The difference is not personality, it is context. Safety and choice shape experience. Another important aspect of this distinction is predictability. Being alone often includes predictability. Environment is familiar. Routines are known. Sensory input is controlled. Isolation often lacks this stability. Unpredictability increases stress response. The nervous system scans more actively. Attention narrows. Emotional regulation becomes more difficult. Again, the issue is not being alone. It is being unsure. This understanding removes stigma. Disliking isolation does not mean someone cannot tolerate solitude. It means the nervous system is responding appropriately to uncertainty. Wanting connection in isolation is not weakness. It is regulation. At the same time, enjoying solitude does not mean someone avoids connection. It means the system feels safe enough to rest. This nuance is often missed. People are told they should enjoy being alone, or that they should seek more connection. These oversimplifications ignore biology. The nervous system does not respond to labels. It responds to conditions. Agency is one of those conditions. When solitude is chosen, the system understands that connection is available. This knowledge allows vigilance to decrease. Awareness softens. Internal processing deepens. When isolation is imposed, the system remains alert. it prepares for uncertainty. Stress chemistry remains elevated. This is why even brief moments of chosen solitude can feel calming, while prolonged isolation can feel exhausting. Choice changes meaning. Importantly, this does not mean isolation cannot be endured or adapted to. Humans are resilient, but it does mean isolation requires different support than solitude. Support does not always mean adding people. It may mean restoring agency, increasing predictability, reintroducing a sense of control. Small choices matter. Being able to choose when to be alone, being able to choose how long, being able to choose how to reconnect. These choices signal safety. Understanding this distinction allows people to respond more accurately to their own experience. Instead of asking, "Why can't I handle being alone?" the question becomes, "Do I feel safe and in control right now?" That question leads to better answers. As we continue, we'll explore why some nervous systems thrive in low stimulation environments and why sensitivity can be a strength rather than a weakness. For now, it's enough to hold this clearly. Being alone is not the same as being isolated. One restores, the other alerts. And the difference lies not in presence, but in choice. Some people feel noticeably better when stimulation decreases. Their breathing slows more quickly. Their thoughts settle sooner. Their bodies relax without effort. This response is not learned behavior. It is biological. Human nervous systems vary in how they process stimulation. Some systems are more responsive to sensory input. Sound, light, conversation, and movement register more strongly. This does not mean overwhelm is constant. It means input is processed more deeply. These systems reach saturation sooner. When stimulation accumulates, the body looks for relief. Relief does not always come from withdrawal. It comes from reduction. Solitude provides that reduction. In quiet environments, sensitive systems downshift efficiently. There is less to process. Fewer signals compete for attention. The nervous system can return to baseline more quickly. This is why some people appear to thrive when alone. They are not avoiding others. They are recovering. Lower stimulation thresholds mean the nervous system needs fewer inputs to feel complete. Once that threshold is met, additional input does not add benefit. It adds load. When load decreases, regulation improves. Research in sensory processing shows that individuals with higher cortical responsiveness respond more strongly to stimulation. Their brains register nuance quickly. Patterns are noticed early. Changes are detected faster. This responsiveness is not a weakness. It is efficiency. However, efficiency requires recovery. Quiet allows this recovery to happen. When alone, the system no longer needs to filter excess input. Attention narrows naturally. Internal rhythms stabilize. The body recognizes that demand has ended. Overload resolves more quickly. This rapid recovery is often mistaken for preference or personality. But it is not about liking or disliking people. It is about how the system processes information. For these systems, solitude is not emptiness. It is completion. Once stimulation falls below threshold, the system settles. Emotional tone evens out. Mental clarity returns. energy becomes available again. This is why some people feel more creative, more focused, or more emotionally stable after time alone. The nervous system has regained coherence. Importantly, this does not mean these systems cannot enjoy connection. It means connection is most nourishing when balanced with recovery. Too much stimulation without recovery leads to saturation. Saturation leads to fatigue. Fatigue can feel like loneliness, irritability, or withdrawal. Solitude prevents this cycle. Another factor is predictability. Quiet environments tend to be more predictable. Sensory input is controlled. Change is minimal. This allows the nervous system to relax its monitoring. Monitoring is expensive. When monitoring decreases, resources are freed. These resources support thinking, emotional regulation, and sleep readiness. Sensitive systems benefit from this shift disproportionately. Their responsiveness allows them to settle deeply once input decreases. This is why they often report feeling restored rather than bored in solitude. The system is not seeking stimulation. It is seeking equilibrium. This equilibrium supports long-term stability. People who understand their stimulation thresholds are better able to regulate. They recognize when recovery is needed and respond accordingly. This awareness prevents chronic overload. Without understanding, these systems are often misinterpreted. People are told they are withdrawing, disengaging, or avoiding. But biology tells a different story. They are regulating. Thriving in solitude does not mean rejecting connection. It means using solitude as a tool for recovery, a tool for clarity, a tool for balance. When solitude is used intentionally, connection becomes more enjoyable. The nervous system is ready to receive. Interaction feels nourishing rather than draining. This flexibility is the goal. As we continue, we'll explore social load in the evening directly supports sleep quality, and why solitude can make the transition into rest easier. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Some systems thrive alone, not because they need less connection, but because they process more. And when processing is allowed to complete, the body settles naturally into rest. Sleep does not begin at bedtime. It begins earlier, when the nervous system starts to release its grip on the day. One of the most reliable ways this release happens is through reduced social load. Social load refers to the cumulative demand of interaction. Conversation, responsiveness, emotional attunement, timing, and interpretation all require effort. Even positive connection keeps the nervous system oriented outward. As evening approaches, this outward orientation becomes costly. The body is preparing for rest, but social engagement keeps alerting systems active. The nervous system remains partially on duty, ready to respond. When social load decreases, a different process begins. The system downshifts. Evening solitude supports this transition naturally. With fewer cues to track and fewer responses to prepare, vigilance softens. The body receives a clear signal. Nothing more is required tonight. This signal is critical for sleep onset. Sleep onset, it depends on the nervous system's ability to disengage from relevance. Relevance keeps attention active. When relevance fades, sleep pressure builds cleanly. Reduced social load accelerates this process. Research consistently shows that lower evening stimulation is associated with shorter sleep. Onset latency. People fall asleep more easily when their nervous systems are not processing social information late into the night. One of the mechanisms behind this effect is cortisol regulation. Cortisol supports alertness and energy availability. Social interaction, even enjoyable interaction, tends to keep cortisol elevated. When engagement continues late into the evening, cortisol declines more slowly. This delay interferes with sleep readiness. When social load is reduced, cortisol levels begin to fall earlier. The body shifts from preparation to repair. Melatonin is allowed to rise without interference. The transition into sleep becomes smoother. Another important factor is mental replay. Social environments generate narrative. Conversations are remembered. Interactions are reviewed. The brain replays moments to assess meaning and alignment. This replay keeps the system cognitively active. When alone in the evening, mental replay decreases. There are fewer interactions to process, fewer cues to revisit. The brain has less material to reorganize before sleep. This quieting of replay supports deeper rest. People often describe this as a quieter mind. Thoughts feel less urgent. Awareness becomes diffuse rather than focused. This state is ideal for sleep. Reduced social load also supports slow-wave sleep. Slow-wave sleep is the deepest stage of non-REM sleep and is critical for physical recovery, immune function, and memory consolidation. Elevated evening arousal interferes with slow-wave sleep. When the nervous system remains activated, sleep becomes lighter and more fragmented. Lower evening arousal supports depth. Studies show that individuals who experience calmer evenings with fewer social demands tend to spend more time in restorative sleep stages. Sleep feels heavier, awakenings are fewer, recovery is more complete. Importantly, this effect does not require isolation. It requires timing. Connection earlier in the day can be deeply nourishing. Connection closer to bedtime can be stimulating. The nervous system responds to proximity, not just content. Evening solitude creates a buffer. This buffer allows the system to transition gradually. Alertness fades naturally. The body does not have to force sleep. For people who are sensitive to stimulation, this buffer is especially important. Their systems respond quickly to input and take longer to settle when input continues late. Reduced social load protects sleep quality. This does not mean evenings must be silent or solitary. It means relevance must decrease. The nervous system must be allowed to disengage. Quiet activities, predictable routines, low demand presence. These conditions support sleep, regardless of personality. Over time, prioritizing reduced social load in the evening trains the nervous system to associate night with safety and rest. Sleep. Onset becomes easier. Depth improves. Recovery strengthens. Sleep stops feeling fragile. As we continue, we'll explore how nighttime loneliness can coexist with meaning and reflection, and why these quiet moments often carry depth rather than distress. For now, it's enough to remember this. Sleep improves when the nervous system is allowed to finish its work. Reduced social load gives it permission to do exactly that. Night changes the way the nervous system pays attention. As light fades and activity slows, the world becomes less demanding. There are fewer signals to respond to, fewer expectations to meet, fewer roles to perform. The system naturally turns inward. This inward turn is not accidental. Across human history, night has always been associated with reflection. When survival tasks pause, awareness shifts. The nervous system is no longer focused on action. It becomes receptive to meaning. Loneliness often appears in this space, not as distress, not as urgency, but as awareness. During the day, external reward systems dominate attention. Dopamine guides behavior toward novelty, completion, and interaction. These systems keep focus outward. They prioritize what is next. At night, external reward signaling decreases. The brain stops scanning for stimulation. Motivation softens. The pull toward novelty fades. This reduction allows internal salience to increase. Internal salience refers to the importance the nervous system assigns to internal states. Thoughts, memories, values, and questions that were backgrounded during the day move forward. This is why nighttime often feels meaningful. Loneliness appears here not because connection is absent, but because reflection has become possible. The system is no longer occupied with doing. It is available for noticing. This noticing can feel tender. Questions arise quietly. What matters to me? What feels aligned? What feels distant? Loneliness often accompanies these questions, not as pain, but as contrast. It highlights the space between what is present and what feels meaningful. This does not mean something is wrong. Meaning-seeking is a healthy function of the nervous system. It emerges when survival demands recede. Night provides the conditions for this emergence. Research supports this shift. Reduced external reward signaling allows deeper cognitive processing. The brain moves away from immediate goals and toward integration of experience. Memory, identity, and purpose become more salient. Loneliness fits into this process. It draws attention to connection in a broad sense, not just people, but alignment with self, values, and direction. This is why loneliness at night often feels different from loneliness during the day. It is quieter, less frantic, more contemplative. People often describe it as a gentle ache, rather than sharp distress. This quality is important. The nervous system is not signaling danger, it is signaling reflection. When loneliness is allowed to coexist with meaning-seeking, it often becomes informative rather than overwhelming. It helps clarify what feels nourishing and what feels distant. This clarity does not demand action. It simply invites awareness. Nighttime loneliness is often misunderstood because it is felt in stillness. Without context, stillness can feel empty. But biologically, stillness is fertile. It allows the nervous system to organize meaning. This is why many creative insights, emotional understandings, and personal realizations occur at night. The system is no longer distracted. Internal salience has increased. Loneliness can be part of this process. It highlights longing, not deficiency. Longing is not a problem. It is evidence of depth. Importantly, this does not mean nighttime loneliness should be intensified or dwelled upon. It means it can be observed without fear. The nervous system is exploring significance. When loneliness is framed this way, it loses its threat. It becomes a companion to reflection rather than an enemy. This reframing supports sleep. When meaning-seeking is allowed without urgency, the system settles. Awareness deepens briefly, then softens. Sleep arrives naturally once the process completes. The body does not need answers. It needs space to ask. As we continue, we'll explore how alone time becomes a training ground for calm, and how repeated exposure to stillness teaches the nervous system that quiet is safe. For now, it's enough to hold this gently. Nighttime loneliness is not emptiness. It is awareness. And awareness, when allowed to pass through without resistance, carries the nervous system quietly toward rest. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a learned state. The nervous system does not arrive at calm by accident. It develops calm through repeated experiences of safety, predictability, and reduced demand. Alone time provides these conditions in a uniquely consistent way. Each time the system enters quiet without threat, it learns something important. Nothing bad happens here. This learning happens beneath awareness. It does not require intention or practice. It occurs through exposure. When someone spends time alone regularly, the nervous system begins to tolerate stillness more easily. What once felt unfamiliar becomes neutral. What once felt tense becomes quiet. This is habituation. Habituation refers to the process by which vigilance decreases after repeated exposure to non-threatening conditions. The nervous system learns that a stimulus does not require response. Over time, monitoring softens. Alone time supports this learning because it removes variables. There are fewer cues to track, fewer changes to interpret, fewer demands to anticipate. The system recognizes stability. As this recognition repeats, parasympathetic flexibility increases. Parasympathetic flexibility refers to the nervous system's ability to enter and maintain restorative states. The more often the system practices downshifting, the easier it becomes. Calm becomes accessible. This does not mean alertness disappears. It means alertness is no longer constant. The nervous system learns when to engage and when to release. This learning carries forward. People who regularly experience quiet often notice that they recover from stimulation more quickly. After social interaction, stress, or noise, their systems return to baseline with less effort. This is not avoidance. It is efficiency. The system has practiced settling. Another important aspect of this training is internalized safety. When calm is always dependent on external conditions, it remains fragile. Noise, unpredictability, or change can disrupt it easily. Alone time allows safety to become internal. Without external reassurance, the system learns to regulate from within. Breathing steadies. Muscle tone softens. Attention widens. These shifts occur without cues. The body discovers that it can settle itself. This discovery is powerful. It reduces reliance on distraction. It reduces urgency. It reduces the need to escape stillness. Over time, this internal safety changes how loneliness is experienced. When the system feels safe and quiet, loneliness loses its edge. The signal becomes less alarming. Awareness no longer triggers urgency. Calm holds it. This does not mean loneliness disappears. It means the system has room to hold it without stress. Training for calm also changes how the nervous system responds to uncertainty. When stillness has been experienced safely many times, uncertainty feels less threatening. The system trusts its ability to settle. This trust supports resilience. Resilience is not resistance to stress. It is the ability to recover. Alone time strengthens recovery pathways. Importantly, this training does not require long periods of solitude. Short, regular exposures are enough. The nervous system learns through consistency, not intensity. Moments of quiet, low-demand evenings, predictable alone time. These experiences add up. Over time, calm becomes the default rather than the exception. The system no longer scans constantly for stimulation. It rests when nothing is required. Energy is conserved. Regulation deepens. This directly supports sleep, a nervous system trained in calm transitions into rest more easily. Sleep. Onset improves. Depth increases. Awakenings decrease. The body knows how to rest because it has practiced letting go. As we continue, we'll explore how connection still plays an important role, and why flexibility between solitude and connection supports regulation rather than undermines it. For now, it's enough to recognize this. Alone time is not just a pause from stimulation. It is practice. Practice for calm. Practice for safety. Practice for rest. And with practice, calm becomes familiar. Solitude supports regulation. Quiet restores balance. Stillness trains calm. But connection also has a place. The nervous system is not designed to exist in one state all the time. It is designed for flexibility. It moves between engagement and rest, between outward focus and inward settling. Connection can support regulation when it meets the system at the right moment. This timing matters. When the nervous system feels resourced, connection can be grounding. Conversation can steady attention. Shared presence can soften stress. The body uses social cues to confirm safety. This effect is known as social buffering. Social buffering occurs when supportive interaction reduces physiological stress responses. Heart rate slows. Cortisol decreases. Emotional signals become easier to manage. The key word is supportive. Connection helps when it reduces demand rather than adds to it. Predictable, low-pressure interaction can calm the system. Familiar voices, gentle presence, quiet all signal safety. In these moments, connection does not stimulate, it stabilizes. However, the same interaction can have the opposite effect when timing is wrong. When the nervous system is saturated, additional engagement increases load. The system must monitor, respond, and adapt when it needs to recover. Social cues become demands rather than support. This is why connection sometimes worsens distress. It is not the presence of people that matters most. It is the state of readiness. Readiness determines whether interaction is regulating or draining. Understanding this prevents false conclusions. Feeling worse after connection does not mean connection is harmful. It means the system needed rest first. Feeling better after solitude does not mean solitude is always preferable. It means the system needed reduction. Flexibility is the goal. The healthiest nervous systems move fluidly between states. They recognize when to engage and when to withdraw. They use connection and solitude as tools rather than identities. This balance supports long-term regulation. Connection also supports meaning and belonging when it aligns with internal state. Shared understanding reduces isolation. Being seen without performance reinforces safety. These effects are real and measurable. Research shows that context-dependent connection improves emotional regulation. The same interaction can calm one moment and overwhelm another. The difference lies in nervous system readiness. This understanding removes pressure. There is no requirement to choose between solitude and connection. Neither is superior. Each serves a purpose. Solitude restores. Connection reassures. When these states are balanced, loneliness loses intensity. The system knows it can rest and re-engage when ready. This knowledge itself is regulating. It reduces urgency. It reduces fear. It increases trust. Trust in the system's ability to navigate its needs. People often struggle because they interpret preferences as permanent truths. They assume they must always seek connection or always seek solitude. Biology does not support this rigidity. The nervous system thrives on responsiveness, not rules. When connection is used intentionally, it becomes nourishing. When solitude is used intentionally, it becomes restorative. The system learns that both are available. This availability reduces distress. Loneliness often decreases when flexibility increases. The signal no longer needs to be loud. The system trusts that alignment will return. As we move towards synthesis, we'll look at what science consistently shows when these pieces are considered together, and why balance, rather than labels, predicts sleep, clarity, and regulation. For now, it's enough to remember this. Connection is helpful when the system is ready. Solitude is helpful when the system needs space. Neither defines you. Both support you. And flexibility between them is where regulation lives. When we step back and look at the research as a whole, a consistent pattern begins to appear. Being alone and feeling lonely are not opposites. They are not competing states. They are not measurements of success or failure. They are signals that arise under different conditions, serving different functions. Science does not support the idea that loneliness automatically means something is wrong, nor does it suggest that being alone is inherently harmful. What research repeatedly points to instead is readiness. The nervous system is always asking a quiet question. Is this a moment for engagement or a moment for release? Sleep quality, emotional regulation, and cognitive clarity improve when behavior aligns with that readiness. When the system is allowed to reduce demand, downshift occurs. When the system is supported during engagement, stability follows. Labels do not determine outcomes, conditions do. Studies across neuroscience, psychology, and physiology show that reduced stimulation supports regulation. Lower sensory load decreases vigilance. Lower social demand allows stress chemistry to settle. Lower relevance permits the brain to disengage. These effects occur regardless of personality. Some systems reach saturation sooner, others tolerate engagement longer, but the biological mechanisms are shared. Sleep research reflects this clearly. Sleep onset improves when the nervous system is not actively monitoring. Depth increases when cortisol declines appropriately. Slow-wave sleep strengthens when evening arousal is low. These changes are driven by stimulation level and predictability, not by identity. This is why alone time can support sleep for many people. It reduces demand. It allows the system to finish its work. Loneliness, when it appears, does not negate these benefits. Loneliness is a perceptual signal, not a stress response by default. It reflects awareness, not dysfunction. When interpreted neutrally, it does not activate alarm. It does not prevent regulation. In fact, when loneliness is allowed without urgency, it often resolves on its own as the system recalibrates. Science also shows that balance matters. Excessive isolation increases stress when agency is removed. Excessive stimulation increases stress when recovery is absent. The nervous system does not thrive at either extreme. It thrives in responsiveness. Connection supports regulation when the system is ready. Solitude supports regulation when the system needs rest. Sleep improves when the system has moved smoothly between these states throughout the day. This fluidity is protective. The myth that people must choose between being alone or being connected oversimplifies biology. The nervous system does not operate on identities. It operates on signals, noise and quiet, demand and release, monitoring and rest. When these signals are respected, clarity improves. Cognitive research shows that attention recovers with reduced input. Emotional research shows that affect stabilizes when performance ends. Research shows that rest deepens when relevance fades. These findings converge. The body wants to sleep. The brain wants to settle. The nervous system wants completion. Being alone often provides the conditions for that completion, especially in the evening. Loneliness may accompany awareness during this transition, but it does not block it. Understanding this removes pressure. There is nothing to correct, nothing to optimize, nothing to force. The system already knows how to regulate when conditions allow it. When people stop judging their internal signals, those signals soften. Monitoring decreases. The mind becomes quieter, not because it is suppressed, but because it has been heard. Science does not ask us to eliminate loneliness or pursue solitude endlessly. It asks us to notice context. What is the system responding to right now? Is there too much demand or too little safety? Is there excess, stimulation, or insufficient recovery? These questions guide regulation more effectively than labels ever could. When alignment returns, sleep follows naturally, not as an achievement, but as a consequence. As we move into the final reflection, there is one simple truth worth holding. You are not broken for wanting quiet. You are not weak for noticing loneliness. you are not wrong for needing balance. The nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and when its signals are understood, rest becomes less effortful and more inevitable. As we come to the end of this quiet exploration, there is nothing that needs to be concluded or solved. No lesson to memorize. No behavior to change. No label to adopt. What we've seen again and again is that the nervous system is not confused. It is responsive. It notices conditions. It adjusts accordingly. Being alone is not a problem to escape. Feeling lonely is not a flaw to erase. They are part of the same system. One that is constantly seeking balance between engagement and rest, between outward focus and inward settling. Tonight, it may be quiet where you are. The world may feel simple. The signals fewer. The space more noticeable. That space is not emptiness. It is a pause the body understands. Throughout this video, we've gently traced how solitude supports regulation, how loneliness acts as information, and how balance, rather than identity, shapes sleep, clarity, and emotional steadiness. None of this requires effort. The body already knows how to move toward rest when it feels safe enough to do so. The brain already knows how to settle when relevance fades. Sleep arrives when the system has finished its work. There is nothing you need to become. You do not need to be more social. You do not need to be more independent. You do not need to correct how you respond to quiet. Your nervous system is not measuring you. It is listening. If loneliness is present tonight, it does not need to be pushed away. It can exist without urgency. Awareness does not demand action. If solitude feels comforting, that comfort does not need justification. The body recognizes safety when it finds it. Both experiences can coexist. As the night continues, stimulation naturally decreases. Sound softens, light dims, the pace slows. The system recognizes these signals and begins to release what it no longer needs to carry. Breathing deepens, muscles relax, attention widens. Rest does not arrive as something earned. It arrives as something allowed. This is the quiet intelligence of the body at work. Tonight, being alone is not a state to escape. It is a space your body already understands. And in that understanding, the nervous system settles, the mind grows quieter, and sleep comes when it is ready. Gently, naturally, and without force. Thank you for spending this time here. Wherever you're listening from, may your night feel safe and your rest come easily.